This is part 2 of the James Corbett interview. This interview has been censored to adhere to YouTube's guidelines. The other thing is they're passing an act in the big beautiful bill called Invest in America Act, where they're giving $1,000 to every newborn baby. I see this as another, trying to push up the market with printed money. And there's a guy named John Titus that created a video where he was talking about going direct. And to me, this is just an expansion of going direct. Are you familiar with John Titus? And do you have thoughts about the investing $1,000 for every newborn?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in fact, I have interviewed John Titus a number of times. I featured his work in my How BlackRock Conquered the World documentary, where I talked about that going direct reset. For people who don't know, in 2019 at the Jackson Hole Bankster Conference there in Wyoming, in August, I believe, of 2019, the BlackRock philosophers and economists were there to propose with the new white paper, or shortly before the conference, they proposed with the new white paper, the going direct reset. Essentially, hey, we're pushing on this string every way we can. I mean, Japan's even trying negative interest rates and all this sort of stuff. But the way to really get money into the economy in the event of the next crisis that we all know is coming is to go direct instead of essentially capitalizing the banks in the hope that they will lend out into the real economy. No, we just push it out directly into the economy, helicopter money, as it were. And well, we all saw what that actually eventuated into in the event of the next crisis, which lo and behold came several months later. They told us, of course, the scamdemic was the reason for the trillions and trillions of dollars that suddenly started to slosh through the economy and the ballooning of the debt once again. So we saw to some extent that going direct reset coming to fruition in a startling and remarkable and unexpected way just several months after that. And yes, I think that prospect of, hey, let's give every citizen $1,000 so that they can invest in the stock markets is, of course, another way of continuing to keep the bubble growing, to keep the can kicking down the road, as I said before, because obviously there's a huge reckoning that comes with a $35 trillion plus federal debt, let alone private debt as well. How do you keep that expanding? How do you keep credit expanding? Well, you have to keep demand up. And the best way to do that is to create money from nothing, give it to people, and ask them to invest back into the economy. What could go wrong with such a system? I think we will find out sooner, probably rather than later. But at any rate, it's yet another creative scheme. And it brings to mind back in 2008, 9, 10, as I was covering in real time the global meltdown slash bankster bailouts, all of that. And I remember at the time interviewing on a regular basis Bob Chapman, who was writing the International Forecaster newsletter. And I, being a relatively young and green a reporter at the time, was quite concerned with what was going on and pretty much convinced that maybe they'll be able to kick this can down the road for a year or two, but certainly no more than that. And Bob Chapman often chided me, no, I think they have a lot of creative ways of continuing to expand this debt bubble. You will be surprised. And you know what? He was right. I was wrong. They managed to continue that debt bubble expanding all the way to today. So it's one thing for me to predict this is going to come to an end very soon. But I have been proven wrong on that count before, so I maintain some humility in my epistemology in that regard.
I've certainly been wrong too about that. I thought C19 was part of the ending, and I was completely wrong about that. And I mean, a lot of people will argue technology is like deflationary, so you have to wonder if they're trying to figure out if they're balancing deflationary technologies with an expanding money supply, and they have like the right mix of this. But there's a lot of banks having issues due to the cartels being labeled. um, they're getting a lot of their accounts looked at. There's a lot of banks that in Mexico that are having troubles. They're not being able to give their um, accounts any money or anything like that. Do you think that this could potentially be a catalyst for a domino effect in the banking sector?
I would believe it when I see it. I don't know about what specific reports you're referring to and which specific banks are being targeted right now. I would assume none of the big name banks.
No, not any of the big name banks, but in the past, Chapo had his bank account at HSBC
Right. Yeah.
sanctioned,
Yeah.
and I mean they have a very long history of being
Oh yeah.
in that
Yeah.
market, right? So I'm
I've
thinking,
reported on that before. Yeah. And there was the infamous story of the Colombian drug cartel going to essentially lobbying for the head of the New York Stock Exchange. Hey, man, we need the money to continue flowing to us. Um, but yes, no, it is, I guess, a sort of Damocles that regulators and governments can hold over these banking institutions as a form of leverage to play the game or, hey, guys, we could do this. But I'm not holding my breath waiting for HSBC or any other major bank to really ultimately feel the pinch on this, unless and until there is some sort of. And you know what? There are sometimes operations that are played even amongst the big players, people who are part of this too big to fail banking oligarchy. Sometimes they do fight, and sometimes big institutions do go down. To a certain extent, that is what we saw in 2007, 2008, with Bear Stearns and all of that. There certainly was there were elements of the banking oligarchy that were taken down at that time. And in fact, I have done work on, for example, the Glass-Steagall legislation and where that came from and what it was about. And when you trace that far enough back, it was actually a bankster infight between the Rockefeller upstart banking cartel and the established Morgan banking cartel. And they were essentially fighting with each other, and that's what the Glass-Steagall legislation was actually about in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. So there are, I think, actually interbank wars that take place, and who knows, there may be some aspect of the oligarchy that might wants to take down, say, a different aspect of the oligarchy, like HSBC, and they might use that. But again, it's sort of the threat that is always there. And there's a lot of different ways that, this could be implemented in a lot of different sectors. In the banking sector, it could be something like that. But again, I'll believe it when I see it. I just don't. In my lifetime so far, I don't think I've seen a major bank truly being taken down for something like that. There are slaps on the wrist that are given here and there, but I think Attorney General Holder under Obama put it best. Yeah, no, there are banks that are too big to fail, so they're not going to fail, and there are two banks that are too big to jail, so they're not going to be jailed, essentially.
absolutely. I mean the whole system comes collapsing down, right? If you take out HSBC, they're critical at that
Yeah.
point. I've noticed I find common themes and threads while I'm researching various topics in crypto and technology. Do you see the same thing? And do you think that's like uh, somebody purposely trying to fit pieces together, or do you think that's just pattern recognition on my part?
Well, which common threads are you referring to?
Well, like just all the finance stuff. For example, like creating a proof of concept with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority for tokenizing real estate for the purpose of home equity loans. So when we're talking about mortgages and public equity, private equity rather,
Mm-hmm.
and all this stuff, what I see is the retirement accounts staking their homes in order to get leverage to put into the market, pushing up the market as high as you can go, rug pull, and then the dominoes start to collapse and their homes go with their stock portfolio. Um, and it just seems very deliberate to me. But
I agree. Essentially, I mean, I think the concept here is there's nothing new under the sun, and what we are seeing is just iterations of patterns that have been done. And I think part of what we are living through is financial capital having gone through the productive economy and then essentially cannibalizing itself with the advent of CDOs and all of those exotic instruments, and now starting to cannibalize the earth itself. All of these resources that are going to be create tokenized and then traded and all of this. Um, I think is just the cannibalization of financial capital until it starts to eat itself. And where does that end? I mean, where does that ultimately lead us? It's going to lead to trillions of dollars of baloney funny money that will evaporate into thin air at the first point at which someone pokes a hole in it. The question is who pokes the hole and when and how. But yeah, essentially all of the scams are just iterations on the same scams that we've seen before.
I noticed that you have quite a few videos up of Epstein, and I'm curious to hear your take. It seems like the entire public is aware that this was was a cover up, and whatever. It's just part of the corruption. Um, what are your thoughts about that? And like the public just waking up that the
Mm.
whole system is just corrupt and warped.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, when events like this take place, part of the question is at what point does the corruption go from corruption and sort of, oh, that's the way big politics works, to the point where you get the let them eat cake, okay, let's their heads. I mean, but having said that, does that, like the French, ever actually fundamentally upset the ruling oligarchs? Generally not. No, generally there are figureheads who are put out that can be sacrificed. Having said that, at this point in the Epstein story, I think part of what is going on is clearly a signal. This is obviously a signal to to people who are involved in the ruling oligarchy that don't worry, we have your back. I mean, we this will be swept under the rug. It does not matter how many people understand this is a lie. It just doesn't matter. It is going to be swept under the rug. And I think at a certain point, they're sort of laughing in the public's face. What are you going to do about it? And that is genuinely a real question right now. What is the public? Because as you say, not one person in 100 truly thinks, there was nothing to see there. It was all a hoax, as we are being told now by the very same people who for years were telling us that we need to open the files. No, no one really believes that. But yeah, what is anyone going to do about it? Oh, okay, well, that's the way they're operating, and they get away with anything. At a certain point, either there is the breaking point reached, or we have reached full-on Caligula levels of not just corruption and debauchery, but just total licentiousness amongst the ruling class.
So my content attracts a lot of people from different communities, like let's say, and I often get into like arguments with them. Do you get the same thing happening, and do you think there's any truth behind a lot of these different
Well, I certainly hear from a lot of groups like that. I don't get into arguments with them because I don't particularly care. The difference, I think, is that they care what I think. I don't care what they think. The point is, I am putting out truth as I see it based on the facts that I have accumulated based on my knowledge of the world. And I know I have the epistemological humility to know that I do not know everything. And there are things that I no doubt am wrong about, sure. But I am always the most suspicious of those people who know 100% everything about everything, or they are 100% totally utterly sure about this incredibly, convoluted theory that they have, and if you don't believe it hook line and sinker and in every single way conform to what I believe about this, then you're a shill, you're opposition. I just don't have time for that. I'm not interested in that. That doesn't particularly affect me. I'm going to continue putting out information to the best of my ability as a fallible human being. No doubt I have been wrong in the past. I'm sure I'm wrong about things at the moment. I'm doing my level best to correct course when new information is provided. And who knows, I could be wrong about the most fundamental aspects of the universe. But yes, I do find it highly interesting how some people's method of argumentation is simply to start calling anyone who will not toe their party line as a shill because they are 100% certain that they are correct.
yeah, yeah, but I will say that they got the whole elites
Well, if we're
right.
referring specifically to all they did was come and cannibalize the work of productive researchers who had been talking about that for decades before them, and then parading on it as if they had done anything themselves, which they had not. So, for example, I mean, I'm certainly not the forefront of the research of this, but I had an episode of my podcast back in 2015 talking about political, talking about Epstein, etc. And then a few years later, dropping things on 4chan, and people are like, "Oh my God, you won't believe." Has just taught the world. Well, actually, I will believe it because I was talking about it for years and I was citing researchers who'd been talking about it for decades. Look at someone like Nick Bryant writing about the Franklin scandal and dropping the Epstein Black Book a decade plus ago on the internet. If there is a client list, as people seem to think that there is, it's essentially the Black Book with the circles, right? That was Nick Bryant. It had nothing to do with QAnon, but for some reason people attribute these things to QAnon simply because QAnon talked about it and got a lot of publicity for it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's actual research. It's being reflected in the post, and then it comes back to it. That's a great point. So, um, I know where I want to be considerate of your time, so I don't want to go on and on. But is there anything that you think is important to discuss that we missed?
There are a million things in the going on right now that I'm sure are important, but I guess I would just reiterate that basically I think what our conversation swirls around, generally speaking, is the fact that yes, in case anyone out there didn't know, there is a ruling oligarchy that should not exist but does, and that they will go to insane lengths to not only continue to consolidate their power, but to expand that power over people. And I think this is leading us down a very dark road. And I certainly don't have the silver bullet answer. I tend to believe there probably isn't a silver bullet answer to this, but I certainly know that unless and until people confront that rather bracing reality square in the face, that we can't even begin to start sorting out the actual solutions to these problems. So that is what I'm doing. I'm here ringing the alarm bell. I hope people will join me in that quest. I'm glad that there are people like yourselves and others out there that are willing to have these conversations.
Yeah, and you're really a library of information. And not only are you a library of information, you articulate it very well too. So I know you've been at this for quite some time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. Can you tell everybody where we can find you and how we can see your work?
Yes, please go to corbettreport.com, Corbett report.com. And I know that that is an increasingly uphill battle, but I guess it is one that I will die on because I know there are people have really downgraded their digital experience from an actual physical desktop that they can actually to some extent actually control and refine searches and go to websites, etc. It's been refined down to the vending machine of the smartphone, where essentially you're just pushing buttons and going to the same few apps and or websites and expecting that all information will be there. So what's the point of having my own website with my own servers hosting my own material? It is precisely because, for example, as I think you know, and hopefully some of your audience has been aware, I was completely and totally censored off of YouTube a few years ago for daring to speak out against the and daring to say things that are perfectly 100% allowable to say today. And I know that because a couple of months ago, YouTube just decided to give me my channel back. Sorry, you didn't violate our community guidelines. Sorry for any trouble we caused you. Here's your channel back. Total nonsense, but it was at the very least an interesting wake up call for me about how few of my audience would even countenance the idea of going from YouTube all the way over to corbettreport.com and typing in all those letters into their search bar or their address bar in order to continue following my work. I get that most people, sure, are casual viewers who will dip in here and there if they see something of interest. But for people who actually appreciate my work and know that I do good work, I've been doing it for the past 4 years, even when I wasn't on YouTube. So that is the place to go. I'm sorry, that is a long-winded answer, but I just want to drill it into people that you can get information from people directly if they have their own website with their own servers, hosting, for example, their own RSS feeds. So you do not need to sign up to Google or any other third party middleman in order to have an account so that you can say that you want to follow somebody that they could completely censor off their platform tomorrow. You can directly subscribe to people through RSS feeds and get an update every single time there's something new to the server. Sounds like a good deal, but for some reason that knowledge has been, I think, occluded from the public's attention over the past decade or two, and I will continue fighting the uphill battle trying to remind people that it might be worth their time to visit sites other than YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever, TikTok.
Yeah, people are used to their updates within the app. But you bring up a great point, the RSS feed, and I wasn't aware that you had your own servers everywhere. That's pretty impressive that you're that censorship resistant. It's
Yes. Servers that are generously donated by Euro VPS, and they have been doing that for over a decade now, 14 years, I think now. And so I think people should support EuroVPS. They have stuck up for for their clients in court for First Amendment, or not First Amendment, but European, challenges to free speech, etc. And they have stuck up for their clients and will not take things down. So, yes, thank God that there are people like that out there that are still willing to stick up for that and to help propagate this information and make it available on servers that are not owned by Google or the other big tech overlords.
And also, I just wanted to say that I asked you a lot about like what's going to happen, your opinion and subjective information, but a lot of your content and just even your answers were backed up with objective facts all along the way. It wasn't like you were just saying something. Everything was backed up with due diligence, and I really appreciate that from you, James, and I appreciate coming on the show. Thank you.
And sorry, not to hijack that last sentence, but just for people who are interested in literally anything we talked about today, just type any of those terms in the search bar of my website. Type Bogle, for example. You don't know John Bogle? Type Bogle in my search bar. If you don't know about BlackRock, type BlackRock in my search. If you don't know about Holder and Too Big to Jail, type that into my search bar. All of that is there, and I do document by linking directly to source documents when possible. So yes, thank you for noticing that. I do try to back up what I'm saying with actual facts.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you would like to support this work and get uncensored, ad-free content, please consider joining my Patreon. If you would like to learn more about James Corbett, visit thecorbettreport.com.